wires working. Can you hear me? Thank you for that introduction, Les. I really didn't realize all the things that I do. At the end of the day, I'm a forester. I was educated as a forester. I actually practiced forestry for a number of years. I even still fill out my tax return in the occupation stated as forester. Now, the real foresters at our company roll their eyes when I say that, and my wife had the nerve to ask me if the rest of the tax return is more accurate. But nevertheless, I'm just a forester. This is not a bad thing to do. It's a great pleasure to be here with you tonight. I thank Lee for the invitation. I look forward to this, and it's a lovely crowd here tonight. I hope you've enjoyed your dinner. Lee said that I had an hour or more to speak tonight. Fortunately, the Eighth Amendment of the Constitution still affords you with reasonable protection against cruel and unusual punishment. So I'll try to be a little bit more judicious with the time. I'll try to tax your academic patience, but hopefully spend a little time this evening talking about a subject that I believe is near and dear to all of us. When Lee called and asked if I would be interested in coming and speaking to the group tonight, he said, I would like you to speak on the theme of why do we have private forests in Alabama? My initial thought was, well, that's a very simple question, but the more I considered it, the more I understood it to be actually quite profound and something that's very timely given some of the circumstances that we face in this day and time. Also, as someone else said, that is a forester. I've been blessed to manage private forests in Alabama for my career. I've been able to make a reasonable living, been able to feed and shelter two Alabama boys and an Alabama girl that I married 26 years ago. I've been able to keep my bride in the most fashionable footwear over those years. Someone else has that experience, right? I have 3 pairs of boots, these black shoes, and some tennis shoes. Been able to keep my sons in the modern electronic gear and the essential necessity that everyone in the house has an Apple iPhone. So as a forester, I have a very personal stake in that. About 3 years ago, I became a forest landowner, something that fulfilled a lifelong dream for myself. Acquired a small tract of land in southwest of Tuscaloosa, Alabama in November 2010. Just in advance of and just in the path of the April 27 tornado. So as a landowner, I've learned some very, very important, very real lessons about the challenges we all face to get land back in condition after an event like that. John has been on the property. He can attest to what it looks like after a tornado goes through 300 acres of 19-year-old pine plantations. And also as president of a company whose business is to acquire and manage timberlands as investments, private investments for pension funds to pay retirement benefits, for university endowments to help fund the operations of the university, and for private foundations to take the returns of those investments to do some, we think, some very special work. People like the St. Jude's Hospital, Mayo Foundation, a number of places that depend on the results of those private forest lands to further their work. So, and as I considered the question, certain things came to mind. First it did force me to stop and think about the great legacy and the heritage that we have in this state with private timberland. Oftentimes things that we have in front of us day to day, we begin to take them for granted. And that's dangerous. Things we take for granted, they're subject to lose. I thought about this some. I went home about a week ago, and my wife was in the living room, and I went up and I gave her a hug and I kissed her, and she said, well, what's that about? So I've been thinking about private forest lands in Alabama. Of course, you know, we've been married long enough, she overlooks all the abnormalities and odd behavior that I display from time to time. And I said, no, it's just, you know, like those timberlands. I want to let you know I appreciate you. You've been blessed with a wonderful wife, and I recognize that great gift, and I'm going to do the things that I need to do to keep her happy. So, you know, so I have a very personal stake in this question of why do we have private timberlands in Alabama? What are the circumstances that caused us to have this heritage that we have in the state? And how do we ensure that going forward we'll also be able to have these private timberlands and the benefits they provide all of us? So I thought we'd begin to kind of describe what are the private timberlands of Alabama. So I had to stop and go back and you can see different sources, but the Alabama Forestry Association has some forestry facts that indicate that 71% of our state is in forest land. That's about 22.6 million acres. 94% of that is privately owned. That's tremendous. 94% of those forest lands are owned by private landowners. Some are large institutions like We Manage Farm, but most of them are by landowners like yourself. These forests have a diverse mix of species, pine and hardwood. There are a lot of natural forests. About 3/4 of the forests of Alabama are natural. There's a little over a quarter that are in plantation. We have about 28 billion cubic feet of standing inventory. These forests provide employment directly for about 70,000 Alabamians with a payroll of about $2.2 billion. About another 100,000 Alabamians are employed indirectly because of the value of these forest lands. So it's an amazing heritage that we have, and it's largely attributed to the private ownership. I'll ask you a question tonight. Just imagine that the Alabama forests were owned not 94% by private owners, but 94% by public owners. I think we'd have quite a different circumstance than we've done. You can look west and you see states in this country that have that circumstance. So we have a wonderful heritage of the private forests of Alabama. How did they occur? Well, first off, and I guess I'll start as in the beginning. In the beginning, we were providentially blessed in this state with the characteristics to grow forests in abundance. We have generally easy terrain, we have fertile soils, we have good rainfall, we have a long growing season, a good climate, so we have the natural blessings of forests in this state. We also have been blessed with a strong series of private property rights, so that owners such as yourself can make investments in forest lands with some sense that you will enjoy the economic benefits, that you yourself make decisions on how these lands are managed to meet your needs, not someone distant from the property. We also have very strong and diverse markets for the products that we grow. If we didn't have markets and the economic benefits, we couldn't make the investments to produce the kind of benefits that we have in the forests of the state. With a little bit of understanding, I would say we also have enjoyed for a number of years reasonable taxes and regulations. We're not without taxes, we're not without regulations, but for 2 or 3 decades now that we've been in a state where we've had taxes and regulations that did not hinder the advancement of the forest in this state. And we've had effective fire control. I may not remember to come back to this, but I'll just leave you with one thought regarding that, is that let's support our state commission, Linda Casey, and the work that they do there. They provide very essential services to us, and during the state budget times, there's a lot of agencies that haven't done as good as the Forestry Commission has in terms of cutting headcount over the years. They're pretty lean, they're pretty mean, they need our support. If you've ever had a forest fire and called up the phone and got a response from one of the commission crews, then you know the value that they bring. So, these are things that we see have produced the forest that we enjoy today. Now, how do we guarantee that these conditions will remain in place? we've enjoyed a pretty calm period in the industry for about the last 30 years. Really since about the Reagan administration, we've enjoyed a period of time where, you know, the wave of environmental regulation that came into place in this country with the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, the Endangered Species Act, the development of the Environmental Protection Agency, those things that came to bear in the late 60s and through the 70s into the Carter administration. You know, we've all learned as foresters how to manage under these circumstances. As landowners, you're used to BMPs. We've implemented things that have been very effective in maintaining the environmental values of the forest, but, you know, we have seen a change. I hope you're not too shocked by this, but the current administration has basically released the hounds of regulation, and, you know, we have certainly noticed a different attitude, a much more aggressive stance by the administrative regulators in Washington, D.C. And from where I sit, most of the threats we face to those conditions that led to the heritage we have in the forest of Alabama come from Washington, D.C. They don't come as much from Montgomery. You know, we're blessed to have a reasonable group of characters down there now, and the more local it is, the more we can affect things. And I can tell you that the threats that we face today, that you face today as forest landowners, come more from Washington, D.C. than they do Montgomery. So I'd like to spend a little time here this evening, and as the watchman is taught to do, to sound the trumpet. I expect that, you know, someone said, well, you're probably preaching to the choir. And I said, well, the choir's not bad to preach to. And maybe there are a few in the choir that need a little refreshing on the sermon anyway. So, you know, there have been several important issues that have developed in the last couple of years, essentially out of the Environmental Protection Agency. These are issues that could have profound impacts on your ability to manage your land the way you deem best to manage it. Things that have a profound impact on the values you can create in your forest land. One we have, first we'll talk about forest roads. You may or may not have heard of this, but back in 2011, the Ninth Circuit Court, you know, that's the court that's over in California. That's the court that is the bastion of conservative jurisprudence. Not really. You know, they deemed, all of a sudden, in response to a suit, surprise, surprise, that forest roads now should be treated as point sources of pollution under the Clean Water Act, not non-point sources as had been considered for 37 years since the Clean Water Act was passed. For 37 years, we have followed best management practices in each of the states in our country, and in doing so, which is a great success story. BMPs is a model for how voluntary guidelines can be implemented and achieve excellent results. So they changed their mind, and all of a sudden, you know, forest roads, wing ditches, culverts, stream crossings, water bars, broad-based dips, all those things associated with timber harvesting were now point sources. Well, what does that mean? Well, first off, what that means is that passed and became law. Every time you had a harvest operation, or every time you used a road in that sense, you would have to get a permit from a regulating agency to allow that activity on your land. You know, you can say, well, we could manage that, and you could with significant cost. It would hinder your ability to respond as you needed to natural events, but beyond that, it also exposed any landowner to citizen lawsuits. That's one of the components of the Clean Water Act is things that are point source pollutants, like mill effluents. Those things that if there's a permit, someone can challenge that permit. So we would have been exposed to anyone who decided they really didn't like us harvesting timber to file a lawsuit, and then our activities would be stopped until that lawsuit would be resolved. We have seen that that has been something that has been used by opponents of people of cutting trees to hinder those activities. To make the long story a little shorter, a group of industry associations, we actually filed suit with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court heard the case and basically ruled to reverse the Ninth Circuit decision in large part. There are a couple of points still out there that we know that the environmental groups and people that oppose timber harvesting will be filing lawsuits. So what we need on that, something that we're pressing very hard for, is that we get legislation passed that forever makes permanent the treatment of forest management activities as non-permanent source activities under the Clean Water Act. You may have been aware of that, you may not. There's still work to be done. We were pleased with the Supreme Court ruling. That pushed things off for a while, but we know that it's going to come back up again and come back soon. So we'll be working with the Alabama delegation in Washington and others to try to get legislation passed. Another item that you may or may not have heard about was another rule that the EPA made. Actually, the EPA under the Clean Air Act has the ability to regulate greenhouse gases, which are believed to be the cause of climate change and all of those things. And one of the greenhouse gases that the EPA now has determined to be toxic is carbon dioxide. So they regulate carbon. And they made a ruling recently that said that we're going to treat any emissions from woody biomass that is burned to produce energy, the carbon that's released when wood is burned, we're going to treat that carbon the same way we do oil, coal, and natural gas, fossil fuels. Now we understand that if you take a 30-year-old tree and the bark and some of that waste is burned at a pulp mill or somewhere else for energy, but the carbon that's in that wood was stored out in the atmosphere probably in the last 30 years. We also know that it's sustainably managed forest, we're planting trees, so in essence there really isn't a net increase in carbon. So contrary to established science, the International Convention, and to past EPA policy, they've determined that carbon is to be regulated like from woody biomass. Well, how does that affect you? Well, are you interested in new markets? Are you interested in maintaining good, healthy, diverse markets? Well, we're seeing development in a very nascent stage that would be used for energy. Wood pellets would be used to generate electricity in this country. There's a potential huge market for landowners that if the EPA ruling goes through, it will really throttle the development of those markets. Just because they determined that they want to treat carbon that's released when we burn wood in a certain way. My grandfather, who fueled his house with firewood, probably was not concerned about the carbon emissions. Now to, I'm sure, your favorite subject, taxes. We have a fiscal mess in this country. There is an insatiable thirst for new revenue to fuel new spending, and as if you watch the news, you know that everything is on the board. People that we use in Washington, D.C. to advocate on these issues tell us that we can just expect to see pressure to repeal certain of the favorable tax provisions that recognize the long-term nature of forest land investment, the fact that a lot of capital goes up front and the revenue doesn't come for years. There are threats now to things that would allow the deductibility of forest management expenses, the capital gains treatment of timber harvest and the sale of standing timber, and the expensing and amortization of reforestation costs. There's probably very little that we're going to be able to do specifically around that issue. We've talked to, good friends of forestry in the Senate and in the House, and they say, well, everybody's going to have to give something. So I'll just tell you, as you do your tax planning and thinking in the future, you can expect to pay more taxes from your forest lands than you do today. That's not good news, I understand. Finally, on the federal front, one last thing is that the EPA and the Corps of Engineers are revisiting once again what they deem to be the waters of the United States. You may or may not know it, but if you have running water on your property, that's really in yours, that's the United States. And they can affect what management practices you can conduct in those lands. This is an extension and an erosion in the private property rights that we've enjoyed for years. There are studies underway as they're good having studies in DC. In many of these cases, the end result is already determined. They just have a study or two to justify what they intend to do. That's another front. So there are four things that we see on the regulatory issues. If we stand back and look at Washington, D.C., we see regulators that want to change what has worked for 37 years on forest roads. We see regulators that want to treat carbon release from the burning of wood the same way as coal and oil and natural gas. We see taxes that are logical and benefit us as forest landowners in jeopardy. We see another extension of what the government controls around the waters of the U.S., and we stand back kind of in puzzlement at what's going on. Well, you know, Mark Twain wondered during his day about what was going on in the federal government in Washington. He had a saying, and he just wondered, are they smart people that are putting us on, or are they imbeciles that mean it? The worst part is they're smart people that mean it. That's the reality. We need to understand that. You know, these are some visible, some very well-known, specific items that are currently in play in the legislation. These are things that we need to be aware of as forest landowners in Alabama. Now, I want to spend a few minutes here talking about something that is a much less visible threat, something that probably is much less well-known to you, and something that really could possibly affect your access to markets. Now, there are efforts by groups that we call market excluders and market campaigners to create a monopoly in the forest certification market. How many of you are tree farming? How many people here, their land's in tree farming? Quite a few. You know, there's a movement out there that the end game that they would desire is for your tree farm certification would have no value in the marketplace. All of our lands in the U.S. South, 2.5 million acres, are certified to the Sustainable Forestry Initiative standards. These groups would have it that our lands have no value in the marketplace. They are trying to create a monopoly of the Forest Stewardship Council certification standard, the FSC standard. This may be new to you, but I'd ask that you pay a little attention. Let's cover a little ground here. There's a group we call market excluders. U.S. Green Building Council is a good example. And these are groups that want to impose on the marketplace restrictions so that the only wood that really qualifies is wood that is certified through FSC. The Green Building Council has a program called the LEED, L-E-E-D. And it's basically a series of standards around constructing buildings in a way that is energy efficient, that uses sustainable materials and recyclable materials. There's nothing wrong with that concept. That's good. You know, the house I'm in is a lot better, you know, energy efficient than what I had in college. I lived in a house in college that was built in 1920, had 12-foot ceilings, and in the wintertime the curtains blew. Had 3 gas stoves, and you stood in front of them. The floor was wore out in front of those stoves. But there's nothing wrong with green building as a concept. The thing is that LEED only gives credit for wood certified from FSC forests. Your tree farm wood gets no credit. Likewise, SFI certified wood gets no credit. That is an incentive for builders to favor one system, but all are credible standards. All reflect a care of the land and a quality of management that we should be proud of. The thing about it is that 90% of FSC certified wood comes from overseas, from Russia, from Brazil, from Africa, from all manner of countries that I know by experience don't practice near the quality of forest management that we do here in the United States that you do on your lands in Alabama. This program through LEED excludes 5 million acres of Alabama timberlands that are certified either in the American Tree Farm System or the Sustainable Forestry Initiative system. We have begun an effort working with state associations in a number of states all across the South to get governors to have at least proclamations, if not legislation, that says state buildings cannot use any green building standard that is not inclusive of tree farm, SFI, and FSC. a level playing field, so that you know that your state tax dollars that are going to build state buildings are excluding the timber from your property in favor of timber that's grown overseas and shipped in. Market excluders. There are other groups that, again, want to exclude your timber from the marketplace. The next group are what we like to call market campaigners, because that's what they do. Basically, their tactics is a combination of lies, half-truths, personal attacks, and really corporate extortion to force companies to use only FSC-certified products. You may not be aware of that. Next time you get some paper product, look to see what the label is. Is it SFI? Is it FSC? There are a couple of groups I want to draw your attention to. One is called forced ethics. If there were ever a misname in the world, it's forced ethics. Now, this is a group that has tactics such as picket the CEO of Staples, go to his children's softball games, and ticket him as being someone whose paper is sourced from a company that uses wood from non-FSC and they're destroyers of the land. In their words, forced ethics is a statement. It says SFI will put its green label on paper products that have involved clear-cutting ancient forests, aerial spraying of toxic chemicals on communities, polluting waterways, spurring landslides, and threatening rare wildlife. Now, we have 2.5 million acres of SFI certified land. I tell you, there's none of that happening on any of our land or on other SFI certified land. Another group called the Dogwood Alliance specializes in keeping us from destroying our forests in the South. They started up in Tennessee with some chip mill problems and have spread out in other areas. Their statement, again, these are their words, not mine. It says, unlike the FSC, SFI rubber stamps some of the most destructive logging practices, attempting to hide them behind a green sheen. SFI allows for large-scale clear-cutting conversion of natural forest to plantations, unlimited use of toxic chemicals, and many other of the worst practices that leave behind a wake of degradation and destruction. Pretty bad. I don't know how we have managed to have this heritage that we have, given these terrible practices that we're all engaged in. Paper, packaging, and now bioenergy. You know, that's the new frontier for these campaigners. I know a company in the South that's run by reputable people that have been landowners in the state of Alabama for 100 years. They have a wood pellet plant. They received a letter that, you know, if they take any ground wood into that pellet plant, they're going to be picketed by these groups, by the Dogwood Alliance. Dogwood Alliance says that, you know, our success in creating change in the paper industry has positioned us as a leading resource for potential solutions to emerging threats to southern forests, such as bioenergy. The one man's new market is their threat to the forest. Finally, just talking then about FSC. Now, they were founded in the early 90s in California by several radical environmental groups. They were concerned about global forest management practices, about workers' rights, and treatment of indigenous peoples. They hold themselves out to be the gold standard. Now, they don't hold themselves out as just another credible system that has its pluses and minuses like Tree Farm or SFI. They're the gold standard, and they encourage these surrogates, these excluders and campaigners, to oppose all other certification systems. If you look around the world, there are about 30 different FSC-approved standards in 20 countries. You know, we see lands in New Zealand and Brazil and other areas that are FSC certified, that they can have practices there that are not allowed in the United States, but it's still certified as FSC. Now, their goal, and I'll say this is my opinion, they don't have this on their website. And sometimes you get a couple of dots close enough together, you can draw the line. There's the old saying, if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Their goal is to be the only certification system accepted in the market, and they want that all the markets will require certification. What they really want is for the people that make paper and lumber, the panel products to say, we've got enough pressure from our customers, from these campaigners, that, you know, we're only going to use FSC certified wood. And when that happens, they're going to decide that they don't like you using chemicals in your forest. Herbicides that we use to control herbaceous competition, or hardwood control, fertilization, they don't like them. They're not really wild about trees being planted in a row. So if you have any of that on your land, in an FSC-dominated world, that probably wouldn't be a good thing. If they achieve this position, then those things that we have enjoyed that created the forest in Alabama today, we won't have those anymore. Now, I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I don't have but one aluminum hat. But this is something that I'm concerned about. And just to make sure, it was mentioned in the introduction, but again, I'm on the board of the Sustainable Forestry Initiative. I'm vice chair for the next 2 years, and I'll be chair following that. The reason that I accepted that position is because of the concern I have of what's going on in our industry relative to this threat. Many of you out there may have been approached recently by a manufacturer who's trying to get FSC certified wood in their mill. A manufacturer who's had to deal with the business realities of customers that have been pressured by the campaigners to say, I want FSC certified wood. And these manufacturers are having to, you know, with the business realities at hand, try to do that. You may already have entered into some agreement on some of your lands to be FSC certified, and if you have, that's fine. I just want you to understand the people that you're dealing with on the far end, not the local forester that's talking. Those are good folks. But I want you to understand, and you know, expect most of you to have internet, do a little research on forest ethics, on Dogwood Alliance, on FSC, and you'll see who we're working with. They're not our friends. So what can you do? Stay active living. My sense is that this is a fairly active group of living, both at the state level, but particularly at the federal level. Make sure that your congressman and your senator understand the importance of forestry in this state, and understand your view about the threats we face from regulations in Washington, D.C. Make sure that they understand that you want markets to remain open and inclusive for all well-managed forest products. Beware of the FSC. Support the tree farm system and SFI. Those are a few things that you can do. I'd like to end with, first off, my thanks to you all for your commitment to forestry, to the private working forests of Alabama. People like you have helped me have a place to have a career for the last 31 years. I'd also like to kind of think a little bit about one of the founders of our company, Harry Murphy. There's some of you in here probably crossed paths with Harry over the last 30 or 40 years. Or maybe some of you here that crossed swords with Harry over the last 30 or 40 years. But his belief in free enterprise and in the system of capitalism and private property rights and the power of individual landowners managing their forests for their own interest and the interest of society. You know, we will face challenges. We face some now. You know, Winston Churchill had a little saying about adversity, and he was acquainted with it. He said, if you're going through hell, keep going. So I have to encourage us all tonight, if you will, please join me in fighting the good fight to preserve this heritage that we have in Alabama and our private timberlands. You know, so that 50 years from now, there can be a meeting of the Alabama Forest Owners Association, and there might be a speaker there that's addressing the topic of why do we have private forests in Alabama. Good night and God bless.